The room went silent the moment the food left his hand. A rich boy, barely old enough to understand the weight of his actions, laughed as a piece of bread landed on the woman sitting quietly across the restaurant. His mother laughed too, soft at first, then louder, amused, unbothered, confident that nothing and no one in that room could touch them. The woman wiped her jacket slowly, not raising her voice, not showing anger, only lifting her eyes for a brief moment. In that look was something no one noticed yet: authority. What none of them knew was that the woman they had just humiliated wasn't powerless, wasn't insignificant, and wasn't someone they could afford to disrespect. She was a black CEO whose decisions shaped fortunes, and by the end of that night, the same parents who laughed would be on their knees begging for her forgiveness. Welcome to Swift Tale, where we uncover stories that expose arrogance, celebrate quiet strength, and remind us that true power often sits in silence. And if this is your first time visiting Swift Tale, let me ask you, do you enjoy stories where entitlement meets accountability and respect is taught the hard way? If so, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that challenges assumptions and delivers unforgettable lessons. Today's story is about more than a single act of disrespect. It's about how society often underestimates people based on appearance, race, or silence. It's about how wealth can breed entitlement and how privilege can create the dangerous illusion of immunity. This is the story of a woman who rose to the top through discipline, intelligence, and resilience, only to be publicly humiliated by people who assumed she was beneath them. And most importantly, this story matters because it reminds us that dignity is not defined by how loudly you speak, but by how firmly you stand when tested. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, power, and accountability. As this story unfolds, you'll witness how one quiet moment of restraint set the stage for a reckoning that no amount of money could undo. So stay with me, because what begins as a cruel laugh in a restaurant will end in a lesson that echoes far beyond that table. And by the end, you may never judge someone's worth by their appearance again. Long before she ever sat in that restaurant, long before the laughter and the humiliation, she had learned how to survive in rooms where she was underestimated. Her journey didn't begin with wealth or influence. It began with discipline, patience, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Growing up, she was taught early that excellence wasn't optional, it was armor. In spaces where she was often the only one who looked like her, she learned to speak when necessary, stay silent when strategic, and never waste energy proving herself to people who weren't listening. Her rise in the corporate world was steady, not flashy. She earned every promotion through results, not connections. While others relied on inherited privilege or shortcuts, she relied on preparation. Late nights, missed celebrations, and relentless focus shaped her path. She mastered the art of walking into boardrooms where expectations were low and leaving with respect she didn't demand, but commanded. Over time, her reputation grew, calm under pressure, decisive in crisis, and impossible to manipulate. As a CEO, she led with quiet authority. She didn't need intimidation to exert control, and she never confused power with arrogance. Employees respected her because she listened. Competitors feared her because she planned 3 steps ahead. Partners trusted her because her word meant something. She carried herself with humility not because she lacked confidence, but because she didn't need to announce who she was. Her presence spoke for itself if people were willing to see it. Yet despite her success, she was no stranger to disrespect. Microaggressions, dismissive glances, and assumptions followed her into spaces money alone couldn't erase. She had learned not to react emotionally, but to observe, to remember, to choose her battles carefully. That restraint, honed over years, would matter more than anyone in that restaurant realized. Because the woman they saw that night wasn't just a diner in an expensive room. She was a leader who understood power, timing, and consequence. And the moment of humiliation was about to collide with everything she had built. The family arrived the way they did everything, loud, confident, and unconcerned with how much space they took up. The parents moved through the restaurant like it belonged to them, nodding at staff without looking twice, speaking in clipped tones that assumed immediate compliance. Their wealth wasn't new, and neither was the belief that money placed them above correction. Years of privilege had shaped not only their lifestyle, but their attitude toward everyone around them. Their son reflected that attitude perfectly. He had grown up watching adults bend rules for him, laugh off his misbehavior, and explain away his cruelty as just a phase. Consequences were softened, then removed altogether. When he was rude, it was dismissed as confidence. When he crossed lines, it was excused as curiosity. The lesson he absorbed was simple and dangerous. Nothing he did truly mattered, because someone else would clean it up. The mother, in particular, wore entitlement like a badge. She found amusement in discomfort, saw service workers as background noise, and believed respect flowed in only one direction toward her. Her laughter was sharp and dismissive, the kind that signaled superiority rather than joy. To her, the world existed to entertain and accommodate, and anyone outside her circle of wealth was invisible unless they became useful or inconvenient. The father was quieter, but no less complicit. He rarely corrected his son, preferring to let behavior slide rather than challenge the comfort privilege afforded them. Silence, in his world, was easier than confrontation. Together, they had created a family culture where empathy was optional and status was everything. By the time they sat down at their table, they had already decided, without a word, that everyone else in the room ranked beneath them. And in that mindset, disrespect didn't feel cruel. It felt justified. Which is why, when their son locked eyes with the woman nearby, curiosity twisting into mockery, none of them thought to stop what was about to happen. Because in their world, power was something you were born into. They had no idea they were sitting near someone who had earned it. The restaurant was the kind of place where money whispered instead of shouted, polished wood, soft lighting, crisp linens, and a quiet expectation that everyone inside belonged there. Conversations stayed low, laughter controlled, and servers moved with practiced grace. It was designed for comfort, for exclusivity. For people accustomed to being catered to. On the surface, it was a neutral space, but beneath that calm exterior, unspoken judgments were constantly being made. The black CEO sat alone at her table, dressed simply but elegantly, her posture relaxed, her presence understated. She didn't announce herself, she didn't seek attention. To some in the room, she blended into the background, another guest enjoying a meal. To others, she stood out in ways they couldn't quite name. Assumptions filled the gaps where curiosity should have been. People guessed before they knew, measured before they understood. Across the room, the rich family settled in loudly, their energy cutting through the restaurant's controlled atmosphere. Chairs scraped back without apology. Orders were given, not requested. Their son fidgeted, bored already, scanning the room for amusement. His gaze lingered on the woman nearby, not with interest, but with entitlement. To him, she wasn't a person with a story. She was simply there. The staff noticed the tension immediately. Servers exchanged brief glances, instinctively aware that something felt off. In places like this, discomfort rarely announced itself loudly. It crept in quietly, carried on glances, tone, and posture. No one intervened. No one anticipated how quickly the fragile calm would fracture. The CEO continued her meal, unaware she had become the focus of a family that believed status granted permission. She had learned long ago how to exist in spaces that questioned her presence, how to ignore the weight of eyes that didn't bother to see her fully. This was just another room, another table, another moment. Or so it seemed. Because within seconds, that carefully maintained atmosphere of elegance, of order, of unspoken hierarchy was about to collapse. And when it did, it would reveal just how fragile entitlement becomes when it mistakes silence for weakness. It happened so fast that at first, some people weren't sure what they had seen. A flick of the wrist, a careless laugh, a small piece of food arcing through the air before landing squarely on the woman's jacket. The sound it made was soft, almost insignificant, but the message behind it was unmistakable. The boy burst into laughter, delighted by his own boldness, eyes wide as he looked to his mother for approval. She gave it to him. The mother laughed openly, waving it off as harmless fun, her expression amused rather than embarrassed. She didn't apologize. She didn't correct him. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, smiling as if this moment existed purely for her entertainment. To her, it wasn't an act of disrespect. It was a reminder of who she believed was allowed to misbehave without consequence. The restaurant froze, conversations died mid-sentence, forks hovered in the air. A few heads turned quickly away, unwilling to get involved. Others stared, stunned by the audacity of it all. No one spoke. The silence was heavy, uncomfortable, and revealing. In that pause, the power imbalance in the room became painfully clear. The woman reached for a napkin and calmly brushed the food from her jacket. Her movements were slow, deliberate, controlled. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't give them the reaction they expected or wanted. When she finally looked up, her gaze passed over the boy, then the mother, steady and unreadable. There was no anger in her eyes, no humiliation either, just awareness. That composure unsettled them. The boy's laughter faltered slightly, confusion flickering across his face. The mother smirked, mistaking restraint for submission, silence for defeat. She had no idea that what she was witnessing wasn't weakness. It was restraint forged by years of navigating disrespect with dignity. The kind of restraint that waits, observes, and remembers. Around them, the room held its breath. Staff hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or pretend nothing had happened. In spaces ruled by wealth, confrontation is often avoided, even when decency demands it. And so the moment stretched on, unresolved, charged with something far more dangerous than anger. Because humiliation cuts deepest when it's public. And power shifts most decisively when the person being mocked doesn't break, but takes note. What none of them realized was that this single careless act had just crossed a line that money, laughter, and arrogance could not erase. The reckoning had already begun. For a moment, no one moved. The air in the restaurant felt thick, as if everyone sensed that something deeply wrong had just occurred but didn't know how or whether to respond. A few diners glanced toward the woman, waiting for outrage, tears, or at least a sharp word. When none came, their attention shifted back to their plates, relief mixed with guilt. Silence became the easiest option, and in that silence, the family's arrogance found room to breathe. The boy, encouraged by his mother's laughter, leaned back in his chair with a grin, emboldened by the absence of consequences. He didn't apologize. He didn't look ashamed. To him, the moment was a victory, proof that he could do whatever he wanted and walk away smiling. His mother watched him with satisfaction, as if his behavior confirmed the power she believed their wealth guaranteed them. The lack of immediate pushback only reinforced her confidence. Staff members exchanged uneasy looks. One server took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, eyes darting toward the parents. Experience had taught them that challenging wealthy patrons often came with a price. Complaints, bad reviews, lost tips. Management would rather smooth things over than risk confrontation. So they waited, hoping the moment would pass without escalation. Across the room, the CEO remained composed, finishing her meal as if nothing had happened. But inside, she was fully present, fully aware. She noted the mother's expression, the father's silence, the son's smirk. She had seen this dynamic before, people confusing politeness with permission, restraint with weakness. She didn't need to respond immediately. Time was on her side. The mother glanced toward her again, expecting perhaps a reaction now, something to confirm her assumed superiority. When she received none, she laughed once more, louder than necessary, making sure the room knew she was unbothered. It was a performance, meant to reassert dominance. What she didn't realize was that the performance was being watched far more carefully than she imagined. Because silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means someone is deciding how, when, and whether you will learn a lesson. And as the family continued their meal, basking in the comfort of unchecked entitlement, the balance of power in the room was already shifting, quietly, invisibly, but irreversibly. What the family didn't know, what no one in that room could have guessed by her quiet presence, was that the woman they had just humiliated controlled decisions that moved millions of dollars every year. She wasn't there by chance, and she wasn't out of place. She was the CEO of a company whose influence extended into industries that touched nearly every part of modern life. Contracts, partnerships, investments, entire business ecosystems shifted based on the choices she made in private offices far removed from public dining rooms. She had learned long ago that power doesn't need to announce itself. In fact, announcing it too early often invited the wrong kind of attention, so she let people assume, she let them underestimate. That habit had served her well throughout her career. People revealed their true character when they thought no consequences were attached, and she took careful note of those moments. This was no different. As she finished her meal, her phone vibrated softly on the table, messages from executives, updates from legal teams, reminders of meetings scheduled for the following morning. Names on the screen would have stopped the laughter instantly if the family had seen them. Companies the father admired, brands the mother bragged about, institutions they believed placed them firmly at the top of the social ladder. All of them, in one way or another, intersected with her decisions. The irony was almost unbearable. The family prided themselves on wealth, on influence, on being untouchable, yet they were dining just feet away from someone whose professional reach quietly exceeded their own, someone who didn't need to raise her voice or demand respect to command it, someone who understood that dignity, when combined with authority, was far more powerful than loud entitlement. She stood, adjusted her jacket, and prepared to leave. Still no confrontation, still no announcement, just a final glance in their direction, calm, measured, and deliberate. It wasn't a warning, it was acknowledgement, a silent confirmation that she had seen everything and that she would remember it. The family barely noticed her leaving. To them, she was just another guest, another moment already fading into the background. They had no idea that the real story was only beginning. Because the truth about who she was didn't need to be spoken aloud yet. It would reveal itself soon enough. The first signs came not with confrontation, but with silence. Emails that were usually answered within minutes sat unopened. Calls that once received enthusiastic callbacks were routed to assistants, then postponed, then forgotten altogether. Meetings were rescheduled. Proposals were placed under review. To most people, these delays would have seemed minor, coincidental, but to those who understood how business truly moved, they were unmistakable signals. Something had shifted. The CEO hadn't issued threats or made demands. She didn't need to. She simply allowed processes to run their natural course, processes she oversaw, shaped, and influenced every day. Due diligence was tightened. Partnerships were re-examined. Standards that had once been flexible suddenly became firm. Decisions were no longer rushed in favor of convenience or familiarity. Professionalism, once optional, became mandatory. Meanwhile, the father began to notice cracks forming where certainty once lived. A long-anticipated deal stalled without explanation. A trusted contact stopped responding. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. At first, he dismissed it as bad timing or market fluctuations, but the pattern was too consistent, too precise to ignore. Something or someone was quietly closing doors. The mother felt it too, though she couldn't name it. Conversations grew tense. The ease that once surrounded their lifestyle began to fray at the edges. Questions replaced assumptions. Confidence turned into irritation. They sensed resistance but couldn't locate its source, and that uncertainty unsettled them more than outright opposition ever could. All the while, the CEO continued her work as she always had, focused, deliberate, and principled. She didn't act out of anger or revenge. She acted out of alignment. Alignment between values and action, between respect and access. Those who failed to meet that standard simply found themselves outside of it. The family still didn't know her name. They didn't connect the woman in the restaurant to the shift in their fortunes. But cause and effect were already in motion. And by the time they understood the connection, the lesson would be impossible to ignore. The realization didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, half-answered questions, awkward phone calls, and meetings that ended sooner than expected. The father, increasingly frustrated, finally pressed one of his longtime business contacts for clarity. The response was careful, hesitant, and laced with discomfort. A name was mentioned, then a title, then a pause long enough to let the weight of it settle. That was when everything changed. He went quiet as the pieces fell into place. The woman at the restaurant, the one his son had mocked, the one his wife had laughed at, was not just important. She was powerful, more powerful than anyone at that table had imagined. Her company sat at the center of several partnerships his businesses depended on. Her approval wasn't symbolic, it was structural. Without it, nothing moved forward. The color drained from his face as he replayed the scene in his mind. The food, the laughter, his own silence, What had felt like a harmless moment of entitlement now revealed itself as a catastrophic mistake. For the first time, he understood the cost of having said nothing when it mattered. Power, he realized too late, doesn't always announce itself, and disrespect doesn't disappear just because it's ignored. When he told his wife, her reaction shifted instantly. The laughter she once found amusing curdled into panic. She insisted it had been a misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context, but beneath the excuses was fear, real, unfiltered fear. The confidence she carried so easily in the restaurant evaporated when faced with consequences she couldn't buy her way out of. Their son, sensing the tension, grew quiet. For the first time, his behavior was being discussed not as harmless mischief, but as something with real-world impact. The shield of indulgence cracked. He didn't fully understand the implications, but he felt the shift. The safety net he had always relied on was no longer guaranteed. By the end of the night, the truth was undeniable. The woman they had disrespected wasn't someone they could dismiss or overpower. She was someone whose forgiveness mattered and whose silence was far more dangerous than anger. And in that realization, a new urgency took hold. They had laughed at her once. Now they needed her mercy by the time the parents approached her. The laughter of the restaurant long behind them, the dynamics of power had shifted completely. They begged for forgiveness, humbled and aware of the gravity of their mistake. The boy, too, learned the weight of disrespect in a way money had never taught him. And the CEO, composed as ever, had a choice: to punish, to lecture, or to respond with measured grace. She chose dignity. She accepted their apology, but made it clear that respect is earned, not assumed, and that actions have consequences, no matter one's wealth or status. In that moment, justice was not about revenge. It was about accountability, recognition of wrongs, and teaching a lesson that would resonate far beyond the restaurant's walls. This story matters because it reminds us that entitlement and privilege do not protect people from consequences, and that integrity, patience, and composure often wield more power than wealth or arrogance. It challenges viewers to reflect on how they treat others, how they assess true authority, and how quickly the balance of power can change when underestimated. Moments of disrespect can have consequences, and courage combined with wisdom can turn an attempted humiliation into a transformative lesson for everyone involved. In the days that followed, the family felt the consequences of their actions in ways they hadn't anticipated. Deals that once moved smoothly now faced unexpected delays. Social invitations that had seemed automatic were suddenly withheld. Contacts they had relied upon began to distance themselves subtly, unsure how to navigate the tension created by the incident. Privilege, they realized too late, could not shield them from the ramifications of public disrespect, especially when it involved someone whose influence far exceeded their assumptions. The father, once confident in his ability to control outcomes through money or connections, found himself frustrated and powerless. He realized that influence isn't just about wealth, it's about relationships, reputation, and integrity, none of which can be bought after the fact. The mother, previously dismissive and amused, now replayed the restaurant scene in her mind endlessly. Her laughter felt hollow in hindsight, replaced by embarrassment and fear. She began to understand the weight of underestimating someone based on appearance or demeanor, and the vulnerability that comes with assuming privilege grants immunity. The son, observing his parents' discomfort, began to glimpse the consequences of unchecked arrogance. Though he was young, the lesson struck hard. Actions have repercussions, and behavior tolerated in one setting may be judged harshly in another. This period of reflection forced the family to reassess how they treated others and the values they had instilled. It became clear that wealth alone could not protect them from social, professional, or moral accountability. The restaurant incident, once a fleeting moment of amusement, became a pivotal turning point, a humbling experience that would remain in their memories far longer than the laughter that preceded it. And through it all, the CEO remained distant, but ever present in the consequences she had quietly set into motion, a testament to the power of composed authority and the inevitability of justice. While the family grappled with the repercussions of their behavior, the CEO continued her work as she always had, quietly, efficiently, and deliberately. She did not flaunt her power or revel in their embarrassment. Her influence was exercised through decisions, processes, and the careful management of her company. Every delayed contract, every tightened review, and every subtle shift in attention was a reminder that respect and accountability mattered more than wealth or entitlement. Her actions demonstrated that true authority doesn't need to announce itself. It is measured by results and the consequences of neglecting basic decency. Her silence was strategic. By not publicly shamming the family, she retained control of the narrative and allowed the natural outcomes of their disrespect to unfold. People around her noticed the shifts without her ever speaking a word, reinforcing the idea that power exercised judiciously is far more formidable than power displayed arrogantly. Employees and partners alike saw her as someone whose calm composure and ethical approach commanded respect, setting a standard for professionalism that extended far beyond a single incident. In this way, the incident at the restaurant became more than just a personal affront. It became an example of leadership in action. She showed that influence is not defined by confrontation, but by how quietly and effectively one can steer outcomes, enforce standards, and uphold values. While the family learned lessons about humility, she reinforced lessons about the potency of silent authority and the enduring impact of disciplined, principled action. The CEO's legacy, as always, was built not on spectacle, but on consistent, measured excellence that left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it, directly or indirectly. Beyond the immediate drama, the story sparked broader conversations about entitlement, respect, and social perception. It highlighted how wealth and status can distort judgment, giving people the false confidence that their behavior has no consequences. The incident became a mirror reflecting societal biases, assumptions about power, appearance, and race. To many observers, it wasn't just a personal humiliation. It was a lesson in how quickly arrogance can meet accountability when people underestimate the strength, intelligence, and influence of others. The CEO's response also offered a powerful moral framework. She demonstrated that true authority is rooted not in intimidation or retaliation, but in dignity, composure, and ethical consistency. By acting with measured restraint, she allowed the family's own behavior to reveal its flaws, showing that leadership is not about dominance, but about the ability to influence outcomes without losing moral high ground. In this, the story reinforced a universal lesson. Power wielded with integrity always surpasses wealth wielded without conscience. At the same time, the narrative forced reflection on privilege and bias. The family assumed entitlement would protect them, that laughter and mockery were harmless, and that their social position insulated them from consequences. The reality exposed a stark truth: respect is earned, and no amount of inherited wealth can substitute for character. The story resonates because it challenges the audience to examine their own assumptions. How often do we judge others based on surface appearances? How often do we underestimate someone because they are quiet, composed, or different from us? Through this lens, the restaurant incident transcended a single moment of disrespect. It became a broader cultural commentary on the intersection of wealth, power, race, and morality, illustrating that real lessons are often learned in the collision of hubris and wisdom. This story isn't just about a rich boy throwing food or a mother laughing at someone they underestimated. It's about the lessons we all carry into our own lives. It asks the audience to reflect. How often do we assume status or appearance defines capability? How often do we mistake silence for weakness or underestimate someone because they don't assert themselves loudly? The CEO's composure and the family's eventual reckoning show that true power lies not in arrogance or privilege, but in integrity, patience, and quiet authority. Moments of disrespect may seem insignificant, but they can reveal character and consequences far beyond the initial act. It's also a reminder that accountability comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most effective responses are measured, deliberate, and principled rather than loud or retaliatory. By choosing dignity over revenge, the CEO taught a lesson far more impactful than any confrontation could have. Respect, after all, is earned through consistent character, not by inherited wealth or momentary laughter. At Swift Tale, We share stories like this to inspire reflection and growth. Think about the situations in your own life. Are there moments where patience, integrity, or composure could change outcomes? Are there people you've underestimated who might have far more influence than you realize? Stories like this remind us to pause, observe, and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Swift Tale and comment below about what lessons stood out the most to you. Because the power of a story isn't just in the events, it's in the change it inspires, the questions it raises, and the actions it motivates us to take. True strength is quiet, consistent, and enduring, and sometimes the smallest moments reveal the greatest truths. Long after the restaurant incident, its impact continued to echo in ways both subtle and profound. The family's laughter had been replaced with reflection, embarrassment, and a deeper understanding of how easily arrogance and entitlement can blind people to consequences. They had learned, painfully, that wealth does not exempt anyone from accountability, and that respect is not a courtesy. It is earned through conduct, humility, and consideration for others. For the boy, the lesson arrived early, shaping his perception of behavior, privilege, and responsibility in a way that mere lectures never could. For the CEO, the incident became another testament to the power of composure, patience, and ethical leadership. She demonstrated that true influence does not require intimidation or spectacle. It manifests quietly, in decisions, in follow-through, and in the ability to let consequences unfold naturally. Her actions reminded everyone watching, directly or indirectly, that dignity and integrity outweigh wealth and status in every meaningful way. She didn't need to punish them to teach the lesson. Her restraint and the unavoidable results spoke louder than any confrontation could have. Ultimately, the story's legacy lies not in the humiliation of the rich or the moment of laughter, but in the enduring principles it illustrates. Respect is earned, power is measured by character, and consequences are inevitable when arrogance meets awareness. The restaurant table became a stage for a timeless lesson. Those who underestimate others do so at their own peril, and those who act with courage and dignity leave a mark far more permanent than any fortune. The CEO's quiet authority, combined with the family's humbled recognition, ensures that this story will be remembered not for the food thrown, but for the lessons learned, the changes sparked, and the legacy of integrity it leaves behind.